Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 241 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I am your host, Mike Ayalon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and a two-time author. Our second book, From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education and Leveraging Belonging to Eliminate Hazing, is available now at Amazon. So go and pick up that book today. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, as a student who is going to be listening to this podcast episode right now, I want you to think about your major and what the future is like in your field in terms of demand. A recent survey in March of 2022 of college graduates, it appeared in Bloomberg, and it talked about nearly 40% of business, engineering, biomedical science, and computer science majors earned more than $90,000 annually, while more than 40% of social science, communication, education, and art majors earn less than $45,000 annually. Now, I'm not trying to say that it's all about the money. I don't want to get any hate mail. I know you want to change the world, and I know you want to make it a better place. I'm just suggesting that I don't want you to be saddled with hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt without the ability to put food on the table and then make the world a better place at the same time. Our next guest is Marc Rappaport. He's had a very interesting and varied career in renewable energy and conservation. Over 50 years, he's the inventor of the geothermal solar thermal hybrid system. He has designed solar buildings. He's built a solar hot water heater from recycled materials. He's a pioneer of a wood waste biomass cogeneration power plant in Medford, Oregon. He's presented at various conferences, as well as being an invited speaker at the Sustainability of the Planet conference, which is held in Stockholm, Sweden, at the Nobel Institute. He's written white papers for the White House and is also the author of the new book. It's called On the Verge of Tomorrow. Welcome to the show, Marc.
Well, good morning, Michael. Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
It's fantastic to have you. You know, I think our college students have so much to learn from you in terms of what the future looks like and making sure that whatever their field of study is, it's aligned with the future in terms of demand and where we're heading as a society. So I think you can really shed a really good light on all of that. But before we get to that, I think it's important for us to understand your background. I know you decided on Cal State East Bay for your undergraduate experience. So I'm wondering, what made you choose Cal State East Bay?
Well, I happen to grow up in the Bay Area, San Francisco and Marin County. And it was the 60s. And you really wanted to maintain your student deferment. Otherwise, you got shipped off to Vietnam. And I lived in Berkeley, and I was working for Pacific Gas and Electric. And in fact, I was a field manager for Oakland, where we were converting the utilities to underground, anticipating the development of BART. So it just made it a lot easier to stay at East Bay. If I'd gone to Berkeley, I would have had to work my ass off. Pardon my French.
I know completely. I've spoken at Berkeley quite often, and boy, oh boy, I mean, those students really work their tails off in order to get where they're going over there. So I completely understand where you're coming from.
Yeah, my sister went there. My cousins have gone there. And with the war going on, I had to put myself through school.
Right.
So I was working and did what I could and made it convenient, because you don't want to drive into San Francisco across the Bay Bridge too often. So anyway, I made it manageable.
Yeah, that makes total sense to me. Now, I know that you pioneered what's called biomass power from wood waste. So explain to our audience, what is biomass power and what was the process like for you in terms of discovering it from wood waste?
Well, one of the jobs I had while I was working my way through school was working in a sawmill in Northern California, pulling chain. It's a very tough job. And I, really learned just what that life was like, where you're living near the woods and cutting wood, and they put it in what they called a wigwam burner. And it was burned in this environment, wigwam. That, of course, they had to close all those down, but it really stuck with me. And having worked in a utility, and I was a math major in engineering, I couldn't figure out what I was going to really do. I was sort of ambling around, just maintaining my deferment. So I invented the hybrid energy system in '72. There's a prelude to that as to, in high school, I was invited to Berkeley Nuclear Research Facility, and I got to conduct an experiment. That was firing a neutron into the bubble chamber and watching the subatomic particle arrays come out of that collision. And when you were in that environment, you have to walk around concrete walls in 90-degree angles so that radiation, random particles don't escape, which really set me on a path to what else could we do? Now, 10 years later, I had what was one of the first power contracts, called an independent power contract with the utility, for the development of that invention under the Carter administration. That was '79. And then Reagan came into office and canceled a lot of the renewable research. I had my funding canceled. It was a multi-million-dollar award. And of course, he took off the solar collectors off the roof of the White House. But while I was doing that, I also learned so much in the process, since I did the business plan as well as the engineering, that the potential for wood waste existed based on what's called avoided cost in the power purchase contract. It was based on nuclear. And I found that you could build a power plant based on wood waste, which this is what the wood product, the pulp industry does all the time. They use an internal power plant for steam production and electricity from their waste to use to run the processes of the pulp mill. My position was utilities and the wood products industry, they don't mix. They're like oil and water. And the wood products industry is really cyclical based on the economy. And so the waste stream would be periodic. They'd have a bunch of it, and then things that the economy would slow them down. They'd have less of it. And they didn't want to slow down or speed up based on a power contract. So I saw that the valley down there at Medford had 7 sawmills, and they were taking their waste to landfill. If you took that waste, aggregate it, we could have enough resource to fire a power plant. And so that plant takes 280,000 tons of wood waste debris and uses it as fuel, ground up. It's called hog fuel. It's not for pigs. And people don't know about this industry particularly, but of course, as I say, I had that background working for utility and working in wood products. So in today's market, the local community brings 80,000 tons of waste debris they were burning in their backyard or throwing away, and they bring it to the plant. And at no charge, they can dump it. And I have friends down there, and last time I saw one of my friends, she came up and gave me this great big hug. Oh, Marc, we love Biomass One. And I started that in the early 80s. So I was a founder and a managing partner, and there for 30 years in that company.
That's amazing. That is just an incredible story.
that led to a subsequent biomass cogeneration plants in California, but California didn't listen to me in their politics. They just handed out what they called SO4 contracts randomly, and they overdid it. You need a sort of a insular position that your plant doesn't compete with other plants for the resource. You have to do this thoughtfully. So they ran into some problems. There's another story that I can get into about one of the bankers out on Wall Street called me and said, "Marc, I'm going to lose $1 billion. Can you help?" And I said, "Yeah, I'll talk to a few folks in California." We worked out a deal so that the major finance company that had all of this money invested wouldn't lose it. And they'd keep funding renewable projects. So that's how I did Biomass 1. Eventually, though, I also got the geothermal solar thermal hybrid system. I had some federal grants awards that a utility in Nevada had a failing geothermal plant, 30 megawatts, and was meeting at a geothermal conference meeting, met with their lead engineer, the director of the geothermal office for DOE, and I was exhibiting the PowerPoint based on my patent. And these guys are, "Oh, this is really interesting. Well, would this work?" And I pull out a graph and I say, "Well, here's the thermodynamic analysis." And yes, of course it's going to work. And they did it with the support from the Department of Energy. They spent some serious dollars. They put in, I think it was about 14 megawatts of solar thermal. It cost them $80–90 million. That's more than I have. But I had the concept and I had the solution and all the numbers crunched. They did that. I talked to some Nevada Public Utility Commission staff. They were all pleased. There was an article in Power Engineering on that project. It increased the overall efficiency of the plant up at about 5% and stopped the degradation of the geothermal aquifer. With reinjection, you can keep those systems running. So that proved the commercial scale feasibility. And from that, I've sort of just been twiddling my thumbs, waiting for the crisis to have people knock on my door and say, "Well, what do we do now?" And we can use, things are been prepared. There's a database of all the geothermal wells and oil wells. Gas wells also produce hot water, but it's not hot enough to make power. If you do use the hybrid system concept, you can make power. So I have become involved with a leading designer of the concentrating solar collector systems. And so Gossamer Solar. And so, you know, we're stand ready.
Yeah. Well, this is great. Now I know the guy to call if we need alternative sources of power. Just call Marc and he'll give you a whole list of them. But I want to make sure that our listeners, you know, that they can apply this at home. They probably, many of our listeners won't end up in a power plant. But I do know that, for example, you know, I'm thinking about replacing all the windows in my home right now. They're incredibly drafty. I know the wood is starting to decay around the window just from the sun and, you know, all the weather. So what alternatives do I have in terms of replacing the windows in my home right now?
Well, this is a good time. I have a recommendation. You call renewable by Anderson. Anderson windows apparently are across the United States.
Yeah.
They will finance and give you a year of no payments, and they will send a crew out and they'll replace all those windows you want replaced. And it's not a steel frame, it's not plastic, it's a new material that they have that withstands the expansion, contraction, and the impacts of the weather. Now they will do that. Marvin Windows has a replacement, and if that's a little too spendy, there is another company called Indo Windows in Portland, Oregon, and they make a clear plastic with a special gasketing, and it fits on the inside of your window. So that's a less expensive solution if you don't want to, people don't want to change the exterior. It also dampens the sound transmission. So that's another way to do it.
Wonderful alternatives. I like that a lot. Now, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, and as you know, it gets extremely hot in the South around the summertime. Are there any other alternatives that I can use in order to stay cool in the summer other than replacing all of my windows?
Well, that gets me to energy efficiency, and depends when the house was built. Today's standard is you want to have a insulation factor called R35, if you can fit it into the attic, and it gets blown in. You can get something from Home Depot that'll blow the insulation in. Go for an R35 in the attic. In addition to that, you have automatic vent fans. So you would put a vent fan in the attic. So it extracts the hot air that's accumulating, and you can add some attic vents on this roofing, on your roof peaks. That is a passive way of adapting to the cooling. The other is put good shades, insulating shades or drapes on your south-facing windows. The other is, depending on the color of the house, a lighter color like white will reflect the sunlight and can actually decrease the solar gain.
That's interesting. All right. I like some of the white painted houses. I'm going to have to look into that. I think that could be an option for us. And, you mentioned solar before. I think we should talk about that a little bit because not every home is well positioned to take advantage of solar. So is there a way that we can work with the entire community on community solar if we don't have good solar access at our home?
Oh, yes. This is one of the things that I've been looking at trying to discuss here where I live in Southwest Washington. Clark Utilities did a program in conjunction with legislation that the state of Washington passed as incentives for solar production. So the public utility, Clark Utilities, did a community-based solar installation at one of their locations. It was so successful, people could buy in for $100 and get reduction on their electricity bill. They sold that out in 24 hours. It was so successful, they did 4 of those projects. But that was several years ago. The program, the incentives from the state is, it got booked out, it sold out. And so now we're looking at what can we do additionally. And so I just was checking, the Department of Energy now, EERE, is going to have community-based solar. And I think this is an extremely important development because, as you pointed out, there are millions of houses that don't have good solar access.
Right.
But one example that's real concrete is President Carter took one of his peanut fields and converted it to solar that feeds his community. So it is possible. And I wrote in the book how I described if a community wants to see community-based solar that people can buy into, they can form a nonprofit community solar organization, work with the local utility to get a power contract that they're guaranteed sale, and then people can buy into that and get an offset on their electric bill.
Wow, that's a great option. I really like that a lot. You mentioned your book. It's called On the Verge of Tomorrow. And from this book, what are some new technologies that the students who are listening to this podcast right now can discover in your book in order to ensure that the choices that they make in college in terms of major and career has a bright future?
Well, we have several things happening in biofuels, in biomass. One of the things I learned when I was giving the talk in Stockholm with some of the Stockholm scientists, they had produced DME, it's dimethyl ether, from wood waste through a gasification process. And that in combination with some scientists and engineers at Volvo, have designed, the Volvo now has a Class 8 heavy diesel truck that's dual fuel and will run on diesel or DME. So we know that some modification to diesel engines can run on DME. So there is one company that's providing that DME pump and system. I think it's in Texas. So there is a way to do that. In conjunction with that resource in conversion, gasification is a growing option because not only can you produce the DME, a different process takes a cooled gas, runs it through a process that then converts it into ethanol. In addition to that, there are a multitude of byproducts from the biomass waste that can be used for a substitute for plastics. Again, there's this whole stream of chemistry. There's work that had been done at the National Research Labs in Golden, Colorado, where they developed a bacteria called Zymomonas mobilis. And it has the properties to convert a C6 and a C5 sugar to ethanol with a combined saccharification and fermentation process. Now, those are things in combination, but there are things that are going to happen in finance, that the banks are going to need people who are knowledgeable about some of these systems and yet good at finance, so the banks can finance these new technologies, successful technologies. You have, the multitude of opportunities. Boeing has flown one of their big jets in a mixture of biofuels and jet fuel. So it is emerging. That's already been done. I think Virgin has done that with some of their big jets where they mix it. And you have the biodiesel from waste oil, from cooking oils. The other is weatherization of buildings is going to be big, just as we just described about what to do in a summer heat. So weatherization for older homes is going to be critical because it did not build them with that as forethought. There weren't a lot. There were some, and I have a house that's energy efficient. And in fact, I got a letter, and my house is 15 years old, and I got a letter from the local utility saying, congratulations, you're doing a great job. I'm more efficient and use less energy than new energy efficient homes. I thought I might have to put that up on a website, on a web page, which I have yet to do. I'm like told you, I'm a little old school and I haven't caught up. As much as I try and get some help from my boys, they're so busy that Dad is kind of takes a back seat.
Well, listen, that's certainly proof that you know what you're talking about. And I love that we're talking about alternative forms of energy. I mean, right now, the country and really the whole world is looking for alternative forms of energy. People are trying to get away from Russia's oil and gas. So, you know, we're talking about some alternatives here that could potentially be the solution, right?
Oh, absolutely. Now, there was a program on public television about hydrogen fuels. And in Southern California and Los Angeles, they have a hydrogen plant where they have refueling with hydrogen to fuel cell cars. And the emissions from that is water vapor. You can't get any cleaner than that. That's
That's the best.
That's the ultimate. What comes out the tailpipe? Purified water. The other is the wind systems. There are other systems for smaller locations that are vertical rotaries. They're not all the big windmills with the blades. But they're going to need maintenance technicians. Those things need to be maintained. On solar fields, PV fields, one of the things that people are just now realizing they can do, if they don't build it right on the ground, but elevate it maybe 6 feet, you can graze sheep and goats in that environment, and sometimes cattle. So the dual function and functionality is present. One of the things I talk about in the book is placing windmills on family farms, historical farms who want to be organic, for example, but they can't make their income sufficient to do that alone. But if they get lease payments from a windmill, it makes it more viable on having family farms stay in business.
Yeah.
So it works. If we look and think in terms of the synergies that are available with renewables, we really do stand to benefit as a society tremendously. Another example of this is sustainable forestry. And one of the other things that a friend of mine had discussed with me is China has some communities where they have feng shui forests. Villages have been maintaining a forest above where they are for centuries. And they've found that there's a way of trellising the trunks of these big old trees. And that is from the branches is where they get the wood rather than harvest the whole tree. But if we're going to need our forests to be healthy. So there's going to be jobs in forestry, agriculture. Another thing about the biomass power plant, it's very suitable for district heating. In this situation there in Medford, there's a lumber drying operation and a plywood mill that both use steam. Well, in the United States, we're not as big on district heating as we should be. But if you have district heating in conjunction with, say, the biomass plant, because emissions are tightly controlled, that means you can have greenhouses, you can have fish farming, you can have shrimp farming. I mean, suddenly you have a multiplicity of benefits to the community. An example of this is, I think there's some Israeli company that has developed a way to grow shrimp and are exporting the technology to Southeast Asia. So that, and these are giant shrimp that can be grown successfully and economically for a protein.
Yeah.
But with hot water, where do you get it? You have waste steam out of a biomass plant with cogeneration and district heating. Now, examples with geothermal as district heating are Boise is got a geothermal district heating. Klamath Falls is most, the campus to Oregon Institute of Technology is 100% geothermal heated. The sidewalks, the campus dormitories, the whole campus, plus photovoltaics, it's entirely renewable there. And that's part of their renewable certification. They are doing that there. And that's another thing that students can talk to their professors about. Hey, we have opportunities with new technologies. And it's not just new technologies, just being smart about what our resources are and using them in a smart way.
Yeah, you've given our college students a lot to think about. I think that's absolutely fantastic. Now, you're out in Washington State. We love good food here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I know you have a slew of great restaurants where you can send me. So where should I go for some great food in your area?
Well, you know, like I said, it was probably difficult to narrow it down. So yeah, I'm going to tell you more than one.
Okay.
So if you want a great steak dinner, there are two restaurants in Portland. One is called Ringside. They've been around for years. And these are local restaurants. These are not chains.
Right.
And, oh God, it's Did I write it down? Interesting. Say so. Okay, another restaurant from Portland, but it's in Vancouver, is La Provence. And boy, do they make the most beautiful, delicious croissants. They're very, yeah, they do the job right. In fact, I commented that their croissants are bigger and tastier than the ones I've had in Paris.
Wow, that's a bit high compliment.
It really was. So you asked for quality. Now another is, for example, modest but good, is a place called McGrath's, and they have three restaurants: one in Bend, one in Portland, outside of Portland, Milwaukee, and one in Vancouver. Very reasonable, and they always have fresh seafood, and that's their specialty. Another sort of little higher end and scenic is called Salty's on the Columbia River. And I told you about Snatch. Oh, and for Mediterranean style, a place called Petra in a shopping mall it's a strip mall in Vancouver, off the beaten path, but they have some of the most fantastic lamb, leg of lamb. It's just and basmati rice, but they really do a great job, and they fixed up the interior so you wouldn't know it. You were where you were. They did it right. Let's see who else. Oh, so you have another place that's kind of tavern food. It's called McMiniman's, and they have a wide coverage in Portland for good hamburgers and stuff. That's kind of my take on places, and I can't keep up with the new places. There's some new restaurants down on the waterfront in Vancouver, and I haven't even gotten around to those.
Oh boy, oh boy. All right. Well, the next time I'm in Portland and Vancouver, I know I'm going to be eating like a king now. I'm going to have to spend a week out there just to get through the restaurants.
You definitely could. The pandemic really impacted. There was a fantastic Thai restaurant, but he closed. I think he was on, which of the foodie programs, but it was so hard at times that he closed his two restaurants. He just couldn't continue.
That's why I always ask the question in my interviews, because I know the pandemic has been so hard on some of these local restaurants. I mean, forget about the chains, but the local restaurants, the guy who's just trying to make ends meet, it's been really hard on them. And if I could spread the word about some good local restaurants around the country, and our listeners will go and frequent them, that my hope is that we can keep these restaurants going and not have them close down, because there's nothing more frustrating than a great Thai restaurant that closes down, because you can't replace it.
Yeah. That's just part of what's happened over these last years. But that's why I gave you the names I did. They're local.
Yeah.
They're not chains.
I love it. I love it. All right. So if our listeners listening right now, if they have any questions for you about renewable energy and all these different energy sources that you talked about, maybe they want to go and pick up your book, where should they go to connect with you?
Well, that is, they could go to Amazon.com or Barnes and Noble and order the book online.
Okay.
I went to Barnes and Noble. They don't have a hard copy or paper back there. It's order on demand. For me, I've got to put up a new website.
All right.
And it'll be there. Otherwise, they can find me on Google.
All right, that sounds good. So it's Marc Rappaport. You can find him on Google, and you can find him on LinkedIn. Go and check out his book. Yep, you can go and check out his book on Amazon. It's called On the Verge of Tomorrow. Go and pick up this book. I think any college student that wants to make sure they're on the right track, that they are entering a field that has lots of potential, you want to read through this book. I think it's definitely going to help you out before you get too far in terms of your career and your education. Know that you're on the right track. I think that's the key message here. Marc, thank you so much for all your expertise. I really appreciate you being on the show today. I learned quite a bit.
Well, thank you, Michael. I'm delighted that I could share some of my knowledge. That's why I wrote the book. We really have choices, and it's a lot simpler to make this transition now before the climate gets worse. And I add one other thing. For social policy and political positions really need to address these climate issues. And so if people are going to think about going into law or public administration, those are going to be areas that will also have an important impact on how we go forward.
Great
Instead
point.
of the blockades that we've been facing and the deniers.
Yeah, we definitely have to do something about it. There's no question. I mean, me living on Long Island, seeing the rising water levels, you living out in California and seeing the fires that are out there, you just look at all the storms that are hitting the South. I mean, for you to not see what's going on, I think, is really being naive or just not being open to seeing what's in front of you. There's some
Well,
real
people
problems
have,
we gotta.
I answer people's questions to me, why? And I said, whose sacred cow is getting gored?
Yeah.
You have big industries, monopolies, and they're protecting their sacred cows,
Yeah.
cash cows.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to do something about it, but I think this interview is certainly a step in the right direction. So I
Well,
hope
thank
that,
you.
yeah, I hope that we'll investigate all that alternative sources of energy and that our students, and I believe that Gen Z is the future. I believe they are the solution. They really do want to make this world a better place. And so I'm more encouraged than ever with Gen Z in terms of what they want to do. And I really believe that they're going to fix it for us. So you're speaking to the right audience, that's for sure.
Well, I hope that they will get the book. I tried to make it non-technical,
Yeah.
And maybe there's some sustainability courses that could come out of it. Tell their professors, order the book in volume, and then spread the word.
Sounds
We
good.
have choices, communities, and it's up to individuals. Change the light bulbs from incandescent to LEDs.
100%. That's something real easy that every one of us can
Real
do.
easy. Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, thank you so much. Thank you to our listeners. We hope you like this conversation with Marc. Be sure to like it and make sure that you share this interview with other students on campus. And we hope to see you on another session of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.